Welcome to another episode of the Practical SQL Server HA show. I literally just got back from shoveling my driveway. We're having the forecast is for the entire weekend. We are going to have, on average, about 12 inches of snow. In fact, it started last night, and we are like 12 hours, 14 hours in. I got like snow up to my just below the knee, and it is going to happen still have massive snowfall fall throughout the weekend. So I just need to be ready. The shovels out, the driveway has been cleared, and trying to minimize going out and driving, which actually got me to this week's topic for our Practical SQL Server HADR show. And what I do is, in these talks, is I cover things that will affect the operation, the design, implementation, management, administration, and even troubleshooting of SQL Server high availability solutions. And like I said, because we're getting a massive snowfall this entire weekend, I decided, why don't I talk about a topic where it is that time of the year where after Thanksgiving in the United States, all the way through Christmas and even after New Year, is when change freeze happens. Now, depending on your industry, depending on uh, the nature of the business that your company is in, the change freeze happens either once a year or multiple times in a year. Like, for instance, change freeze look change freeze periods look different for, let's say, a university. Let's say you're working as a DBA for a university, and your change freeze might happen in the beginning of the semester. So there's multiple of those, in addition to when you want to roll out changes, or maybe you're working on a project. Now, before I go any further, let me just describe what a change freeze is. A change freeze is a period throughout the fiscal year or throughout the year, depending on how you structure your year, when the amount of changes is stopped or sometimes pulled back, meaning the goal is to minimize changes to the system so that it doesn't introduce additional risks. That is the main goal. And in some of the environments that I've been involved in the past, most of the time it happens during this time of the year. Like I said, North America, specifically the United States, where it starts the week before Thanksgiving all the way to after the new year. And the purpose for that is, again, to minimize risks, as either more transactions are coming in. Like, for instance, United States Thanksgiving, Black Friday happens after that. So if the company that you're working for is in the e-commerce space, what happens is that they have to make sure that the servers are ready, the systems are ready for the influx of transactions brought about by people who want to buy stuff during Black Friday. And then they introduced the concept of Cyber Monday, where, okay, you can buy all of these gadgets, these electronics on the Monday after Thanksgiving, right? Because of that, the goal of change freeze is to make sure that the system is stable enough, meaning given the amount of transactions, given this amount of workload happening all throughout the holidays, and making sure that we're not introducing more risks. Sure, there will be an increase in the workload, but also trying to minimize risk. Because imagine if you're in the e-commerce space, or you're selling stuff online, then all of a sudden Black Friday happens, or Cyber Monday happens, or in the case of the upcoming holidays, Christmas sales. Like, we in Canada would have Boxing Day, which is the day after Christmas, where people would start doing shopping. So imagine if you're supporting a system where you're opening up the system for sales like this. There will be an influx of users and customers, and your transaction volume will increase because of this, like a spike in the workload, which causes a little bit of challenges as far as the operations is concerned. The last thing you want is to introduce risks by making some changes, deploying new code, making modifications to the systems. That's why companies implement what is called a change freeze period. Again, the goal of which is to make sure that the system is stable enough to make it part of day-to-day business operations. Again, that's one thing. The other thing why a lot of customers implement change freeze during this time is, of course, it's the holidays. People want to go on vacation. People want to spend time with their families during holidays. Of course, in the Judeo-Christian uh, cultures where they would celebrate Christmas all the way to the New Year's, there will be very minimal operational support for the entire system during this time, right? So if you're supporting a 24/7 system, mission critical system, the usual 5 people DBA team or the 10 people operations team, that might be a little bit fewer during this time of the year. And so because of that, companies and organizations are implementing something like this so that you still have people, or if there's not enough people to support the infrastructure or to support the system, they're not being bombarded by so many things going on. I mean, I remember one of those days when I was still working as an operational DBA. My very first on-call assignment, and I'm going to talk about this next week in another episode, but I remember my very first on-call assignment on the night or on Christmas Eve. Right? It's fine when I just have the on-call assignment and I don't really have to worry about anything other than the fact that somebody might call and I have to respond to a call. But that was, I would say, the worst Christmas Eve I've ever had, because I was the only on-call DBA. Alerts are coming in left and right. And in the background, I would hear my family talking, having fun, having Christmas Eve dinner while I'm in my computer carrying a pager, as pages are coming in, and having to deal with that. It's one of those things that a lot of organizations are trying to minimize, not prevent, of course, to minimize, because again, a lot of people are going out on vacation, spending time with their family. There's not a lot of people taking care of the systems during this time of the year. So those are the two main reasons why a change freeze happens during the holiday seasons, right? And I want to spend some time talking about how you can maximize your change freeze period. Because for some people, they think, okay, there's not a lot of changes going on. Maybe we can take a step back, relax, kick our shoes off, and just do nothing, right? Because while it is true that the goal of having a change freeze period is to minimize risks by adding or making changes to the system, there's nothing stopping you from planning for, after this whole thing happens. Typically, there's no code releases, there's no uh, major updates, no major changes that are happening. In fact, you barely work during this time of the year. And again, like I said, depending on how your industry or how your company defines change freeze, most of the time this is the season or the period where you're barely doing any work. But again, that doesn't mean that you're not going to make improvements or you're not going to be responding to incidents or make changes to the system, especially when you're dealing with incidents. Again, emergencies happen whether you like it or not. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. It could happen it was the night before Christmas and my database server went down, and that's why it's an emergency, right? You'll never know. And that's why I want to talk about 3 things that you can do to maximize your change freeze period, right? And in fact, even in the past 2 years throughout the pandemic, companies have redefined how they did their change freeze window or their change freeze approach. A lot of companies and a lot of IT teams would normally get all of the changes in before the period. So, say for instance, in your case, it starts before Thanksgiving in the United States. The changes are rushed; they're pushed in. There's kind of side effects to that, because for one, the normal process of checking in code, validating, testing it, making sure it passes quality before you push in production. There's some of those risks associated with it, but like I said, the goal of why I'm sharing all of this is because we want to maximize how you deal with change trees, period, especially in times when there's not a lot of things going on, right? First thing, right? First thing, and like I said, assuming that there's not a lot of people within your team to cover for operational support, 24/7 support, on-call assignments, you have to, first and foremost, plan for normal operations and unexpected emergencies. Okay? Plan for normal operations and unexpected emergencies. Like I said, emergencies happen. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. But when you have a skeletal crew, meaning there's fewer people on your team, you got to plan for normal operation. And this is where proper planning becomes very important. For one, let's say you're a 5-man team, 4 people went on vacation, and you're the only person left to take care of the rest. I don't know, maybe you didn't plan for the vacation for your Christmas holidays, and then you end up becoming the only person on the team to take care of everything. It's still business as usual. It's still normal operations. So you got to plan for how to handle the workload given you're the only person on the team. This is important because, for one, if you're supporting a 24/7 mission critical system, well, you got to plan for, number one, your your well-being. You got to plan for that. Being on call 24/7, even though there's not a lot of things going on in the system, you still have to sleep. You still have to take care of yourself, eat, unless, of course, all you really want is to be working all throughout the holidays, being stuck in front of your computer and do nothing, right? But you gotta plan for normal operations and for unexpected emergencies. Part of that is also making sure that your day-to-day is still done, despite the fact that you have fewer people on the team, right? If you're checking daily reports from your monitoring tool, that needs to be done. And of course, it's easier when you have 5 people, you split the workload across 5 different people. It's different from when you're the only person on the team, right? So plan for normal operations given fewer people, right? I actually do not recommend being the only person on the team taking care of all of these systems during the holidays. I mean, it's change freeze, but that doesn't mean that your 24/7 systems are not going to die or they're not going to crash for whatever reason. It's still going to happen, right? Again, plan for normal operations and unexpected emergencies. Part of that is knowing how to respond to emergencies even when there's nothing going on. Meaning, normal operations, there's not a lot of changes. The risk, of course, when you're introducing changes to the system is you got to do a lot of root cause analysis after the troubleshooting. Well, first, you got to deal with the trouble. You got to deal with the problem, resolve the issue, and then do root cause analysis. If you have a team working with you, it's a lot easier. But when you're the only person on the team, it's challenging, and that's one of the reasons why change freeze periods were introduced, so that we're not introducing a lot of these risks. Okay, so that's the first one. Plan for normal operation, despite the fact that there's fewer people on the team, and for unexpected emergencies. It will happen. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. Right? So that's the first one. Second is evaluate existing systems that need improvement. Notice that I did not say push for changes, right? Evaluate. And here's the thing, this is the perfect time to actually take a look at the entire landscape. So if you're taking care of a couple of systems, a couple of database servers where they're highly available, they're mission critical, nobody's touching them at this point. You're not installing patches, you're not installing security updates, but this is the perfect time for you to start evaluating your system, right? SQL Server 2022 was released to the general public a couple of weeks ago, and this is the perfect time for you to start looking at, hey, is the existing system that I'm taking care of still under mainstream support? Does Microsoft still support the operating system? Does Microsoft still support a database engine? If not, time for me to modernize it based on, again, what your plans will be for the next year. Now, again, we're not touching systems, we're just looking at it. And you can do this from your documentation. If you have your monitoring tool, it's easy for you to track which ones are up for modernization. Again, it's a fancy term for saying, let's move it off of an old platform, maybe an old hardware, old operating system, or on old database system, and upgrade it, migrate it. Okay, like I said, this is the perfect time for you to do this because nothing is really going on. And if you have, again, if you have monitoring system or a monitoring tool, you already have information based on your inventory. You can keep track of which servers are available, which database servers are available, how large are the databases, how powerful are the systems, are they physical, are they virtual? And keeping track of this and evaluating these systems will give you a head start so that you can be ready for what to do with it uh, in the next year or after the change freeze period ends. Like I said, typically change freeze period ends during the holiday season, ends after the new year. So this is also an opportunity for you to start, you know, planning for what you can talk about in your performance review. Typically, performance reviews happen at the end of the year or the beginning of the year. And because, well, you're not doing anything much, assuming, of course, all the other stuff that you need to do is being taken care of, like backups are being done properly, the typical maintenance jobs are running, you've validated, you've tested. Now this is the time for you to really shine. Looking at the systems that you've been supporting, even if it's just a standalone instance, you can start looking at, hey, we started increasing usage and utilization of this standalone system, and it's starting to become mission critical. Maybe we could turn it around and implement some form of high availability. Or maybe, you know, in one of your failover clusters, one of your availability groups is not highly utilized. Maybe we can move some of the databases from this standalone instance into a high availability solution. Again, just one of those things that you could start thinking about when you evaluate existing systems that need improvement, right? Depending on your workload, this is also the time for you to start looking at capacity planning. If the systems um, are not candidates for upgrades or modernization, you can start looking at capacity planning. Hey, our disk utilization is this much as far as capacity is concerned, or our servers are 80 to 90% utilized 70 to 80% of the time. Maybe we need to invest more in uh, increasing the amount of memory. I'm not recommending increasing the number of CPU cores because of licensing costs. But this, again, this is where you start looking at capacity planning. We're not touching anything here. We're simply evaluating, right? It is important to have data that you have collected all throughout the year or during times of normal business operations that you can use as a basis for whatever recommendations that you're going to make, right? When you're doing your evaluation, it's important for you to have the data. And uh, I don't know if you've noticed, I've mentioned monitoring tools, I think more than 3 times at this point, because this is the type of data that you can actually use to come up with evaluations on how to move forward with the existing systems that you're managing, right? If you're recommending, hey, we need to do an upgrade because server A is still running on SQL Server 2008, running Windows Server 2008 R2. Maybe we need to move to a modern version or a later version because it's already out of mainstream support. That data is already in your monitoring tool, and you can tell them, look, this is what our auditing or our inventory says. Based on that monitoring information as well, you can come up with recommendations about, hey, the database is growing and we are utilizing it all the more. We can possibly increase the amount of compute resources. Again, sometimes uh, the licensing cost is a limiting factor because the more CPU cores you add, the more expensive the licensing becomes. But this is, again, an opportunity for you to start looking at how you can make improvements, right? The third thing is one of those things that technical professionals don't ever want to do. If there is one thing, well, actually, there's a lot, in addition to meetings. The third thing that you need to take into account if you want to maximize your change freeze period is to write and update documentation. Yes, I had to say it out loud because I don't even want to write documentation. Let's be honest, I don't want to say hate is a strong word, but I don't like writing documentation. Some people ask me, hey, how come you write a lot of articles for MS SQL tips? Like, this is my attempt at loving documentation because at some point I need to keep track of what I did. Now, there's multiple reasons why I am a big fan of documentation, even though I don't like it. Like I said, I'll be honest. I don't like writing documentation, but there's a couple of reasons why I am a big fan of documentation. Number one, okay, it improves the way that I manage my system. If I'm taking care of 100 to 100, SQL Server instances, and I need to categorize them, I'll just give you a very simple or a very common scenario. I'm assigned on call, and I get an alert from a server name, IP address, and all these things. I get that information. If I don't have the documentation in place that describes what this server is it in production? Is it in QA? Is it a dev? Is it on a physical machine, on a virtual machine? Oh, what credentials can I use to log in? It will take a while for me to respond to an emergency if something happens. This is going to be frustrating, especially if, man, how come I cannot connect to the server? The server name says it's this one, and you eventually you realize that some port mappings have been modified in order to meet compliance and security requirements. Then if that's not documented, you could spend hours trying to figure out why I can't even connect. And that's just one example. Update your documentation. Systems evolve throughout the years. They get upgraded, they get migrated, they're moved from physical to virtual, on-premises to cloud. If you're not keeping track of your documentation, or if you're not updating your documentation, you are putting yourself at risk, because whether it's documented or not, you're still responsible for it. In fact, one of the things that I tell my customers is, first and foremost, if you're an accidental DBA, or if you're new in the company, the first thing that you need to do is take inventory of everything that you need to be responsible for. Even that database in that office corner running SQL Express, if the finance team is using it and it's mission critical, well, for one, why is it sitting on someone else's desktop running SQL Express if it's mission critical, right? But you would not know if you did not take inventory of the systems that you're supposed to be responsible for, right? The last thing you want is for somebody to, point their finger at you and tell you you're supposed to be responsible for this, but you're not even aware that you're supposed to be responsible for it, right? So update your documentation. Start by asking the question, am I aware of everything that I'm supposed to be responsible for? There's a couple of tools that you can use for this. The Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit, you can roll that out. Just take a quick inventory, gather as many information as you possibly can from all of the SQL servers that you're supposed to be responsible for, even when you're not even aware of it, okay? And then put that into the documentation, put in as much information as you possibly can. And throughout the entire year, when you're busy with projects, when you're busy with managing systems, responding to tickets, responding to emergencies, there isn't a lot of time for you to update the documentation. And that's why change freeze is the perfect time for you to do this. It's one, well, Nobody's going to bug me, ask me to do something or to respond to a ticket because, well, for one, they're not in the office, they're not working, they're on vacation. Number two, we have change freeze, right? Again, this is the perfect time for you to write the documentation or update the documentation. I couldn't count the number of times that the way I respond to an emergency uh, became a lot easy because the documentation is available. I also couldn't count the number of times when I had to spend minutes to hours trying to figure out how things are. And again, even worse, if people are on vacation because it's the holiday. Who do I call? Oh, I'm supposed to call this guy. When you pick up the phone and call the person, well, he's not answering. Or maybe he's on vacation and he's overseas and there's no cell phone coverage where he's going, right? So those are the three things that you can leverage or you can do to maximize your change freeze period. First is you plan for normal operations and unexpected emergencies. Even though change freeze is happening, it's still business as usual. Even though there's only one or two person on a team out of a 5-person team, things still need to get done, right? Daily checks, uh, uh, your monitoring tool need to be sending you reports of how the entire system is doing. The day to day still needs to be done, and so you plan for that. Sometimes you may have to stretch yourself out if you have not optimized or improved your efficiency. It may stretch you a bit because now you're taking care of the workload of other people on your team who are on vacation, right? And also plan for emergencies. So that's the first one. The second one is to evaluate existing systems that need to be improved, that need to be modernized, that need to be um, upgraded, migrated, name it, right? This is the perfect opportunity for you to do that. You're not touching anything. The data has already been collected for you with your monitoring tool in place. If not, you can use information from SQL Server, like for instance, capacity planning for your databases, for your storage. You can look up the backup history to check how the trend of the size of the database is, and also start evaluating capacity. Maybe you need to put databases in a high availability solution, right? This is the perfect time for you to start evaluating and look at existing systems that need, further care and feeding, or maybe need some upgrade and improvements. And of course, it's challenging to do one and two. It's challenging to respond to emergencies. It's challenging to evaluate existing systems that need improvement if in the first place you don't have documentation of everything that you need to be taken care of. They're taken care of. So update your documentation, right? Keep your inventory fresh, keep it updated, make sure that the details of how you connect to it, the details of the operating system, version, patch level, all of these things are updated so that when the time comes that you need to implement what you did in step number 2, which is to evaluate systems that need upgrading or needs improvement, you have that data with you. And now you can start preparing for project plans on how to make it happen. Well, it makes it you make yourself look good by the time you have the next performance review, because now you had all of these things planned out, right? It's just a matter of making it happen either after change freeze, depending on the criticality, depending on the priority, and of course, depending on budget, right? Budget is always the thing. So those are the three things that you can do to maximize your change freeze period. And I know it's tempting to just sit back, relax. It's not as stressful. It's not as busy. So just sit back, relax. But you can do all of these things relaxing. You can take your time. You have an entire change freeze window to do these things. It's just a matter of planning and allocating time. Maybe it's just 20-30 minutes a day, and the rest of the time you can watch cat videos on I'm not recommending that. I don't know why people watch cat videos. I don't like cats. But the thing is that you can plan it out all throughout the change freeze period to make small changes to your documentation, to make small or invest a little bit of time to make your existing systems better, not make better, but to plan to make it better through upgrades, migration, additional resources for capacity, and so on and so forth, right? That's about it for this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. Tune in again next week for another episode. And as we are coming close to the holidays, this is even more irrelevant because, again, when you're the only person on the team taking care of all of these systems, regardless of whether you have change freeze or not, if you don't plan properly, it is going to be frustrating. I'm just saying it out loud. It's going to be frustrating. It's going to be tiring. It's going to be exhausting. That's one thing that I don't want you to be in. Some people take it as reality. Some people take it as, hey, this is what I'm supposed. No, you don't have to. Proper planning, especially in times like these, is the best opportunity for you to prepare so that when the time comes, you're ready for it, right? I like to talk about the preparation and the planning aspect because nobody knows when an emergency happens. But when an emergency does happen, so let's say, for instance, your failover cluster dies for whatever reason, or maybe one of your sysadmins accidentally rolled out a security patch that took down one of the nodes, and then all of a sudden you're not highly available anymore. If you've prepared for how to deal with that, you're not panicking, you know how to respond properly, you know what to expect, and if not, at least you have prepared for it and know what steps to take, right? That's about it for, like I said, this week's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. Tune in again for next week, and I can start, saying something like it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, because it is, and it's also beginning to look a lot like the busiest time of the year for people who would be on call, who would have to take care of mission critical systems, high availability systems during the holiday, right? Also, if there is something that I can help when it comes to preparing your systems for modernization, if you need help with getting some of your databases highly available because now it's starting to become mission critical, reach out. Use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and we can have that conversation about how you can prepare for that. I mean, 2023 is just around the corner. This could be the perfect opportunity for you to shine and demonstrate how you can make that happen for your team, for your company. Again, use that link on the screen, schedule a strategy session, and let's have that conversation. If I can help you with the process, if I can help you throughout the journey, I'll be more than happy to do that. If not, I will steer you in the direction that would help serve you best, right? Again, that's about it for today's episode of the Practical SQL Server HADR show. I am going to see you again next week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Goodbye.